Bhaktivinoda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shama Kund Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki jai. Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Mayapur Dham ki jai, Yamuna Mai ki jai, Ganga Mai ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Tulasi Maharani ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
Glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
To the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Namo Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Vishnu Vidaya. Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Dinamani Namaste Saraswati Devi Bhavani Prachayane. Nirvishesha Pastura Deshakarane. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, The Creation, Chapter 13, Parikshit cursed by a Brahmana boy, text 13 today. Tulayama lavenapi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim utashisha. Tulayama lavenapi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim utashisha. Tulayama lavena pi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim utashisha. Everyone chant, please.
Tulyama lavenapi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim utashisha. Hare Krishna.
Tulayama lavenapi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim utashisha.
Hare Krishna. Tulayama levenapi na sargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martanam kim utashisha. Hare Krishna.
Okay, word for word translation. Tulayama, to be balanced with. Lavena, by a moment. Api, even. Na, never. Swargam, heavenly planets. Na, nor. Apunabhavam, liberation from matter. Bhagavat Sangi, devotee of the Lord. Sangasya, of the association. Martyanam, those who are meant for death. Kim, what is there? Uta, to speak of. Ashisha, worldly benediction. Translation. The value of a moment's association with the devotee of the Lord cannot even be compared to the attainment of heavenly planets or liberation from matter, and what to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for death. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. When there are some similar points, it is possible to compare one thing to another. One cannot compare the association of a pure devotee to anything material. Men who are addicted to material happiness aspire to reach the heavenly planets like the moon, Venus, and Indraloka. and those who are advanced in material philosophical speculations aspire after liberation from all material bondage. When one becomes frustrated with all kinds of material advancement, one desires the opposite type of liberation, which is called apunar bhava, or no rebirth. But the pure devotees of the Lord do not aspire after the happiness obtained in the heavenly kingdom, nor do they aspire after liberation from material bondage. In other words, for the pure devotees of the Lord, the material pleasures obtainable in the heavenly planets are like phantasmagoria. And because they are already liberated from all material conceptions of pleasure and distress, they are factually liberated even in the material world. This means that the pure devotees of the Lord are engaged in a transcendental existence, namely in the loving service of the Lord, both in the material world and in the spiritual world. As a government servant is always the same, either in the office or at home or at any place, so a devotee has nothing to do with anything material, for he is exclusively engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord. Since he has nothing to do with anything material, what pleasure can he derive from material benedictions like kingship or other overlordships, which are finished quickly with the end of the body? Devotional service is eternal. It has no end because it is spiritual. Therefore, since the assets of a pure devotee are completely different from material assets, there is no comparison between the two. Suta Goswami was a pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his association with the rishis in Naimisharanya is unique. In the material world, association with gross materialists is veritably condemned. The materialist is called Yoshit Sangi, or one who is much attached to material entanglement, women, and other paraphernalia. Such attachment is conditioned because it drives away the benediction of life and prosperity. And just the opposite is Bhagavat Sangi, or one who is always in the association with the Lord's name, form, qualities, etc. Such association is always desirable, it is worshipable, it is praiseworthy, and one may accept it as the highest goal of life. Tulayama lavenapi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya martyanam kim utashisha. The value of a moment's association with the devotee of the Lord cannot even be compared to the attainment of heavenly planets or liberation from matter, and what to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for death. Nama Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Vishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine. What a terrific verse this is. Very important verse, and very beautiful and beautifully constructed verse, and it has a lot of interesting stuff going on in it that we'll discuss. So, first word, tulayama. Tulayama means to compare with. It comes from the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit word is tula or tool, which means the balance scale. Like this is tula. And I think in Hindi they call tal, right? The balance scale you see at the sabji markets in Vrindavan, that there's two trays and held up by chains, and then there's a balance bar, and you put the sabji on one side and the weight on the other side to balance it out. So something is being compared, something is being, there's an attempt to balance something or to compare something, the weights of something on this scale. This comparison or analogy, Prabhupada discusses this a few times, the nature of analogy and the nature of comparison. He does it in the beginning of this purport. He says, when there are similar points, it is possible to compare one thing to another. So a good analogy or a good comparison means there has to be sufficient similarities to justify the comparison. Prabhupada was speaking once with a member of Mensa. Mensa is an organization for people with so-called high IQs. So he was talking to them, and he said, no analogy. Of course, it is not always the perfect method. Analogy means the greatest number of similar points. That is analogy. Perfection of analogy is there when there is the greater number of similar points, but we give sometimes the analogy as we understand it. So analogy or comparison is not exactly proof, but it's supporting argument, supporting evidence, that if things have sufficient similarity, you can compare them and gain some understanding. Just like Prabhupada would many, many times do, trying to explain the nature of Bhagavan, Paramatma, and Brahman, he would say it's like the sun. That Bhagavan is like the sun in the sky, or the sun god, or the sun planets. And then the disk of the sun that we see in the sky here from Earth, this is compared to Paramatma. And the all-pervading sunlight, which spreads all over the universe, is compared to Paramatma. So there's sufficient similarities. Krishna is greater than the sun, but there's sufficient similarities that we can draw a useful comparison, draw a useful analogy from it. And then there's bad analogies, where there's not sufficient similar points. When Prabhupada spoke in Boston, I can't remember if it was Harvard or Boston University, and someone asked the old hackneyed question that, isn't it just like that the living entities were just like rivers running down to the sea, and then when the rivers reach the ocean, we merge into the sea. And after that class, Prabhupada said, these Mayavadis, they always give the same old hackneyed comparison. And then another time, this is at a class in Vrindavan, Prabhupada spoke about this. What's a bad analogy and what's a good analogy? He said, this is a Nectar of Devotion class. The Mayavadi philosophers, generally, they give this example, that all the rivers, they flow down to the ocean. This example is generally given that when the river mixes with the ocean, it doesn't matter which course it is following. After all, it is coming to the ocean, merging into the ocean, so that is the ultimate liberation. So I'll take a break there. Prabhupada is saying they give this example, the rivers flow into the ocean, and their course doesn't matter, and then when the waters reach the ocean, they merge. And the comparison is the rivers going into the ocean is ultimate liberation. Then he continues, but this analogy, if you give some analogy, you must consider all the similar points. That is the way of analogy. The more you have got similar points, then the analogy is more perfect. So the rivers merging into the ocean, then you must take further consideration that the superficial water mixing with the ocean is again evaporated. The water is evaporated by scorching heat of the sun. And then he explains, yes, that it merges into the ocean, but then the water is again evaporated, again comes into the clouds, and again falls down on the dry land, and then again into the rivers. So the analogy as the Mayavadis use it is a very imperfect analogy, because if you take the actual similar points, it supports rather that liberation is a temporary benefit and we return again to the material world. So anyway, this is the nature of analogy. There's good analogy, there's bad analogy. And today's verse is saying there's no analogy. These things are so disparate, so different, and so uncommon with each other that you can't make any comparison at all. You can't, there's no way to balance these things out. There's no way to compare these things. There's no way to analogize these things, that they're simply too different. So this is also interesting, that in glorifying devotional service and in glorifying the association of devotees, the verse is using this negative argument that there's no comparison, you can't compare. So in Sanskrit, this is called vyajastuti, where you glorify something but in a negative way, or you criticize something but apparently in a positive way. It's akin to irony, that you're saying it sounds like something positive, but it's actually negative, or you're saying something negative, but it's actually positive. Just like one example, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was talking to Digvijay, and after the scholar composed so many verses, like he recited them like the winds, just off the top of his head spontaneously, spoke 100 shlokas glorifying Mother Ganges. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Oh, very well done. Your poetry is so amazing and so intricate that no one can understand it except you." So it's sounding like, oh, yeah, he's praising the poetry, but actually he's criticizing the poetry because no one can understand it because it's so full of faults. So that's one example of saying something negative while appearing to say something positive. The opposite example is the beautiful verse of Srila Rupa Goswami, Smeram Mangi Traya Parichitam Sachi Vistirna Drishtim Vamsi Nastya Durakashalayam Ujjalam Chandrakena Govindakyam Hari Tanumitam Keshi Tirto Bakante Ma Prekshishtas Tavyadi Hare Bandhu Sange Stiranga. And this verse says, there's this person, his name is Govinda, and he's the most beautiful person you've ever seen. He has this beautiful blackish complexion, and he's standing on the banks of Keshi Ghat in the moonlight. And although he's blackish, he's also so completely effulgent, and his limbs are so soft and delicate, as tender as the tips of a mango twig. And he's holding his flute to his lips. And if you still want to enjoy material life, then my advice to you is don't go see Krishna. Because if you go to see Krishna, you'll forget all about your material life and enjoyment and friendship, family, and love, all of that. So it's a negative instruction. Don't go see Krishna. But the opposite meaning is there actually means go see Krishna, because then you'll obtain all perfection. So today's verse is rejecting this, saying there's no comparison. You cannot compare these things. So this is a very nice glorification that you can imagine, like the tulayama, the balance, that if you put on one side all the benefits of going to Swarga and all the benefits of liberation from material life, you would think that's a very heavy weight on one side. But you put on the other side the tiniest little drop of association with devotees, it'll simply, you can't even compare, it'll just crash the scale. Just like if you put a heavy thing on one side of the scale, like sometimes you see in circus, they have the balance beam, and someone will jump on one side, and then the people on the other side will fly up into the air. So we put one moment of devotee association on the scale, and the scale will collapse, and swarga and the freedom of repeated birth in the material world would just go flying as insignificant. So this is a very, very beautiful glorification. And it's talking about swarga, and it's talking about liberation from material life. Then it mentions Martyanam Kim Utashisha. Martyanam means those who are meant for death. Everyone is meant for death, but specifically this Martyaloka is sometimes the name given for this material, this earth planet. That we're on is called Martyaloka. In Swarga, they also die, but the time is so long, it's almost like immortality, and the enjoyment is so high. So that's being compared, Swarga and liberation. And then it says, what to speak of the petty little enjoyments we get on this earth planet, this Utashisha. I wasn't familiar with this word, but ashisha is like a blessing, like the Brahmanas when they want to bless someone. One popular one is, what's that? Chiranjeev. You bless someone, Chiranjeev, long life. And another blessing you say is ashisha, that you'll get some, I'm blessing you that you'll get some welfare, you'll get some benefit, you'll get some satisfaction, ashisha. So the enjoyment of this earth planet is not even, you can't even consider it. But let's look at Swarga and Apunarbhava. What is Swarga? How do you get to Swarga? You get to Swarga by sacrifice and piety and perfect following of Varnashram Dharma for many lives, and eliminating all sins and doing the most pious works and performing Rajasuya and Ashrameda and all these sacrifices. And in general, we could summarize all of these activities as karma. You go to the heavenly planets, and when you do, you get enjoyment on such a greater scale than we experience here. And beauty and power and influence and intelligence on such a scale so far beyond what we have here. And a lifespan that almost seems like immortality compared to the brief lightning flash lifespan we have on this earth planet. And you get there by perfect performance of karma. So when one of the items being compared is swarga, that means what is being compared is the most full, the most perfect, the most expert, and most extended perfection of the performance of karma. That's what's being compared. The perfection and the goal of all karmic performances is the item being compared, because the goal of all that is going to swarga. And when it compares apunar bhava, repeated birth and death in the material world, when you become free from that, how do you get free from that? By meditation, by Vedic study, by renunciation, and all of this, again, taken in a general sense, is the performance and practice of jnana. So the perfection of cultivating jnana yoga, is liberation from this material world. So when swarga and apunar bhava are being compared, what those two words are standing in for is that it's comparing with the perfection of the process of karma and the process of jnana. And we know that devotees, we have no need for those items, and we reject those items, and we are not motivated by those items. Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karma jnanavritam. Jnana and karma are specifically mentioned, that those things have no place in the performance of devotional service. So when this comparison, or this failure to make a comparison is being made, on the one side, the absolute perfection of perfect performance of karma and the absolute goal of perfect performance of jnana are being compared. And what are they being compared to? Tulayama lavenapi naswargam napunarbhavam bhagavat sangi sangasya. Lavenapi, this word lava means a very brief moment. Prabhupada says that technically it means 1/11 of a second. There are other analyses that are some tiny amount, like a fraction of a second. So this is a lava. So a fraction of a second of what? Bhagavat Sangi Sangasya. Those who are the association of one who is an associate of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or in other words, the association of devotees. So it's not just comparing karma with devotional service, and it's not just comparing jnana with devotional service. It's comparing the absolute topmost perfection of karma and the absolute topmost perfection of jnana with what? With an 11th of a second of association of devotees. And even in that case, you could say, oh, you can't compare, and we often say you can't compare devotional service with karma and jnana. Devotional service is so superior. But even an 11th of a second of association with devotees is so immensely more valuable and so immensely superior that no analogy is permitted, no comparison can be made. You cannot compare it all. So why is that? Swarga is temporary. It's within this material world. And as long as it seems to those of us in Martyaloka, there's years and days and lifetimes of demigods, it's still temporary. Abrahma bhavana, Abrahma bhuvana loka, punaravartina arjuna. That from all the way up to the very top of Swarga, Brahmaloka, all the way down the whole length of the material world from top to bottom, all are places of death, all are places of repeated birth and death in this material world. So therefore, Swarga, it's actually not as great as it sounds if you analyze, because it's temporary and it's still corrupted and corruptible within this material world. And what about apunarbhava, or freedom from samsara, freedom from material contamination, freedom from material birth and death? This actually has the very same faults as Swarga. Although the Brahma Jyoti, Krishna's effulgent energy, is eternal, in fact, that's its only qualification. Sat out of Satchitananda. Sat refers to this Brahma Jyoti. But the attempt of the jiva to merge into it is a faulty endeavor, and therefore that so-called liberation is not eternal. And it's still based on the same principle. Why does someone want to go to the heavenly planets? They want to go for increase of opulences and increase of enjoyment and increase of lifespan, all selfish desires. And liberation contains in its seed the same selfish desire. Bhukti, mukti, siddhi, kami, sakali, ashanta. That bhukti, those who are after material sense enjoyment, are ashanta, are contaminated, are not peaceful, are not settled. Bhukti, mukti, and those who desire liberation, those are similarly ashanta, not peaceful, not satisfied. And siddhi, those who are seeking the yogic perfections, they're all kami. Bhukti kami, mukti kami, and siddhi kami. They're all kami. They're all lusty. So because this selfish lust is at the root of it, therefore, although the goal is supposedly spiritual, the mentality of the individual is contaminated by lust. And because of that, it's rejected. And not only that, but because of that contamination, that liberation is not an eternal position. Yenye ravindaksha vimuktamanina, tvayasta bhava avishuddha buddhaya, aruya kritrena param padam tata, patantito najrita yusmarangraya. That with very great cultivation of jnana, of knowledge, and great cultivation of austerity, and great hardships and great difficulty for a long time, someone may attain very, very nice words. This is also another kind of Vyajastutian way. Oh, you're attaining mukti, but this mukti is called vimukta manina. That you're liberated, but you're only thinking you're liberated within your mind. This is also another kind of subtle criticism of impersonal liberation. You're only thinking you're liberated, but you're not actually liberated. Why? Avishuddha buddhaya, because you're maintaining that impurity of consciousness, that lustiness, that selfish desire at the root of it. And what's the actual problem, the big problem? That you're neglecting Aravindaksha. You're neglecting Krishna, who has beautiful eyes like blooming lotus petals. And what's at the end of it? Patantito najriti yusmarangraya. Because of your neglect of worshiping the lotus feet of Krishna, you must fall down. Just yesterday, I was reading this conversation. I'm trying to remember. Oh, that's right. It was in Borijan Prabhu's book, My Glorious Master. And he was talking about this topic, that the Mayavadis fall from their imagined liberation. And so one devotee said, well, do all of the Mayavadis fall down, or do just some of them or most of them fall down? And Prabhupada said, they all fall down. And why? And he thought for a moment, trying to determine how to explain this deep philosophical point. And he said, because they become lonely. So this is brilliant. Because they become lonely. So because they become lonely, they must fall from that imagined position of superiority, which is the pinnacle of loneliness, because all individuality is washed out, is wiped out. So this is the ultimate loneliness. And because of that, they must fall down from that imagined position because they get lonely. So what's the cure for loneliness? What's the opposite of loneliness? That's having a friend, having association, having people to mix with. And that's the point of Lavenapi Bhagavad Bhakti Sangasya. This is the solution to the whole problem. Not by becoming the ultimate lonely person that I'm God or I'm nothing or whatever the different flavors of impersonalism may be, but thinking I'm a jiva soul, I'm part and parcel of Krishna. And then so someone may rightly think, oh, so I want to associate with Krishna. So let me go to Krishna and I'll associate with Krishna. But even better than that. And after all, the verse says you're neglecting Krishna's lotus feet. So someone may think, yes, I'll go to Krishna. I'll pay attention to Krishna's lotus feet. But what's the proper way to approach Krishna's lotus feet? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Gopi Bhartu Padakamalayar Das Das Das. That not I'm the big Das. Yes, we're all servants, so I'm the biggest servant of all. That's just another kind of contaminated mentality. But thinking, let me become the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. Therefore, today's verse says, Bhagavad Bhakti Sangha. Not that you become Bhagavat Sangha, but you become Bhagavat Sangi Sangha. I'm sorry, I'm messing up the words. Bhagavat Sangi Sangha. That you seek out the association of those who are associates of Krishna. This is the perfection. And this thing is so perfect and so powerful. Even a moment's association is so powerful. Why? Because it surpasses and negates all of the faults that I described from the processes of karma and jnana. It negates that. It's not based on selfish desire. It's based on a desire to serve Krishna and to serve Krishna's devotees. It's not temporary. Prabhupada explains in her purport. Let me see if I could quickly find that. I'll give myself a couple more seconds to find it. Since he has nothing to do with anything material, what pleasure can be derived from material benedictions like kingship or other overlordships? Devotional service is eternal. It has no end because it is spiritual. Therefore, since the assets of a pure devotee are completely different from material assets, there is no comparison between the two. So this temporality and fall down and contamination are completely gone from devotional service, from pure devotional service. Again, Anyabhilashita Shanyam. It's not contaminated, jnana karma dhyanavirtam. It's not mixed with these faulty processes of karma and jnana. Therefore, the process of devotional service, specifically through associating with devotees, is completely free of those faults. Therefore, these two things, associating with devotees and the perfection of karma and jnana, are so completely different in nature that, as Prabhupada said, an analogy requires some points of similarity. There's no points of similarity, so no comparison can be made. And therefore, this verse is being spoken. And of course, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains, he says that if just a moment, a fraction of a second of association with a devotee is so valuable, then just imagine what continued association and service with such a devotee, what that can give, that we can't even imagine. And just imagine the continued association, not just with any devotee, but with a Baba Bhakta, someone on the stage of Baba Bhakti. Just imagine the benefits that can be obtained. And then he goes on, and just imagine if you find a Prema Bhakti, a topmost devotee of all, who's completely absorbed in pure love of Krishna, and you get his association and his service and his hearing from him, then just imagine, we can't imagine what benefit there is from that. If even a fraction of a second of an ordinary devotee completely outclasses karma and jnana, then just imagine those of us who have access to the association of Srila Prabhupada, those fortunate devotees who has his personal association, and also all members of ISKCON who have his continued association in the temple and his Murti, and especially through his books and lectures and hearing from him and devoting our life to serving him. Because this is what Bhagavat Sangi Sangha is. It's not just a devotee is standing here, here's a devotee standing, and here's a fallen person like me standing here. So, okay, I'm next to them. That's Bhagavat Bhakti Sangha, Bhagavat Sangi Sangha. And in one sense, you could say it is, but it's not really what Bhagavat Sangi Sangha is. It's not physical proximity. It's, what's the, do I have it written down here? What's the verse in Bhagavad Gita? By rendering service and an inquiry. What's the, Tadvidhi, yes, thank you, Devi. My wife is here next to me. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. This is really what Bhagavat Sangi Sangha is associating with devotees. It's not just physical proximity. This is many, many years ago in Gita Nagari. One year it was Super Bowl time, and one devotee was having a Super Bowl party at his house and inviting people. I was never into professional sports of any kind, so I didn't go. I wasn't interested, but some people are. And I was talking to him about it, and he said, "Oh, it's devotee association. We're having devotees over and eating prasadam pizza and watching football." But and it's devotees, and they're associating, but that's not really what a devotee association is. It's hearing and chanting together, Madchita Madgata Prana, Bodhayantak Parasparam, This is really what devotional service is, not just physical proximity. And sometimes there are some, again, impersonalist nonsense persons, and they do this mystical transmission of knowledge that, oh, I touch you, just like this. I won't even mention the name, but he was the mad monk of Bengal, is how he's sometimes termed. And he had his disciple, and he touched him on the head, and the disciple felt an electric shock, and he passed out unconscious. And when he woke up, he saw his cheating guru was crying. "Oh, why are you crying?" He said, "Oh, by this electric shock, I've given you all my spiritual knowledge. Now I'm bereft." So Prabhupada said, this is stupid. This is foolish. This is not the transmission of devotional service, how it works. And he would always stress the very, you could even say ordinary or even mundane process, that you go to the person and you render some service. Here's some food, here's some service, here's some preaching, here's some whatever, and you offer it, and in return you get benedictions. And you have some question, how do I engage in devotional service? And he explains, you engage in devotional service by doing this and by doing this. Or I have this problem, how do I address this issue? And he says, you should do it like this. So in one sense, this is ordinary. Question, answer, I do something for you, you do something for me. But this is actually the nature of real devotional service, of real association with devotees. It's based on this. Because when you associate with devotees, with serious devotees, then generally speaking, the result will not be sitting and watching the Super Bowl. Generally, the result will be that you're talking about Krishna, and you're hearing about Krishna, and you're making plans how to serve Krishna. So this process is so amazing, so powerful, that even a fraction of a second of it outweighs all the benefits of karma and jnana. And specifically, there are 5 processes of devotional service. There's many processes of devotional service, but Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Prabhupada in his Nectar of Devotion mentioned 5 of them as being of exceedingly great potency. And those are Nam Kirtan, Satsang, Bhagavat Shravan, Mathuravas, Archamurti Shraddhaya Sevan. Nam Kirtan, chanting the holy name of the Lord, of course, is among the most powerful processes of devotional service. Satsanga, associating with devotees, is of course among the most powerful processes of devotional service. Nam Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravan, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Mathuravas, residing in or visiting the holy places like the temples, and especially like the dhams in India, visiting those places, most powerful. And Archamurti, worshiping the deity form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These 5 things out of all the activities of devotional service have special potency. What's their special potency? This meshes very nicely with today's verse. Srila Rupa Goswami says that these 5 things are so powerful that even if your Shraddha Dure, even if your faith is not very, very well developed, your faith may not be very strong yet or very well developed. In other words, you may be neophyte. And what's the other one? I'm trying to think of the Sanskrit. If your faith is developed, and if you what is it? If your sambandha, if your touch or your connection with one of these 5 things is very small. What's the Sanskrit that Krishna uses in Bhagavad Gita? Men of small intelligence. Alpa, that's right. Finally, I remember the word alpa sambandha. So he says, if your Shraddha Dure, if your Shraddha is not very well developed, and if alpa sambandha, you just have a tiny little amount of touch, of contact with any of these 5 processes, then very quickly you can advance to the stage of Bhava Bhakti, just from a touch of these 5 things. So just like, Tulayama Lavenapi, even an 11th of a second is saying the same thing, just a touch of the association of devotees, so powerful that can very quickly elevate you to a very advanced stage of devotional service. So there's also a very nice companion verse to this verse, Tulayama Lavenapi, that lava, especially mentioning this fraction of a second of devotional service. There's another verse spoken by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. In the Madhya Lila, chapter 22, he's speaking about he's glorifying devotees. And first he says, unless one is favored by a pure devotee, one cannot attain the platform of devotional service. To say nothing of Krishna Bhakti, one cannot even be relieved from the bondage of material existence. Then he quotes the Bhagavatam verse. O King Rahugana, without taking upon one's head the dust from the lotus feet of a pure devotee, one cannot attain devotional service. Devotional service is not possible to attain simply by undergoing severe austerities and penances, by gorgeously worshiping the deity, or by strictly following the rules and regulations of Varnashram order, nor is it attained by studying the Vedas, submerging oneself in water, or exposing oneself to fire or scorching sunlight. So all of these processes, it mentions that it cannot be done by gorgeously worshiping the deity. This is talking about mechanistic worship, going through the motions of worshiping the deity without devotion. So all of these things and austerity and all these things cannot give you devotional service. Then he quotes another Bhagavatam verse. Unless human society accepts the dust of the lotus feet of great Mahatmas, devotees who have nothing to do with material possessions, mankind cannot turn its attention to the lotus feet of Krishna. Those lotus feet vanquish all the unwanted, miserable conditions of material life. And then comes the companion verse I mentioned. Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Shastre Kai, Lava Macha, Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Siddhi Hai. So it's nice. It's obviously it's using the same imagery. Sadhu Sangha, Sarva Shastre Kai. All of the scriptures say that the most important thing is the association of devotees. Lava Matra, this lava, it's the same word as Tulayama Lavenapi, that even an 11th of a second, a fraction of a second association. Lava Matra Sarva Sangha, Sarva Siddhi Hai. All perfection comes. And all perfection ultimately means that it surpasses the perfection of karma, of going to the heavenly planets. It surpasses the perfection of jnana, gaining liberation from this material world, and gives sarvasiddhi, all perfection, which is the perfection of devotional service. And again, just to reiterate, Bhagavatam says, Patantito nadrita yusmarangraya, that you'll fall down if you neglect Krishna's lotus feet. And the best way to approach Krishna's lotus feet is to find those devotees who are cemented, who are dedicated to serving Krishna's lotus feet. To approach Krishna's lotus feet directly is not so cheap thing, not so easy thing. But if we have the fortune of associating with a devotee who is themselves situated at Krishna's lotus feet, then we can approach Krishna's lotus feet. So then one may ask, we'll wrap things up in a few minutes here. One may ask, oh, associating with devotees, so amazing, so powerful. Even an 11th of a second gives you all perfection. So you may think, I think in the course of my years in ISKCON, I've had an 11th of a second of association of devotees. But how come I'm not perfect? I'm not pure. I'm still contaminated in so many ways. How do we understand that? How do we explain that? One way of looking at it is that it takes time, that the 11th of a second is planting a seed, and that will grow and develop and will get to the point of that ultimate perfection. Prabhupada explains it very nicely in another way here. This is from Hari Sori's diary. Reading from that. Panchadravida Swami wanted to know how a person can attain perfection simply from one lava, 1/11th of a second's association with a pure devotee. Srila Prabhupada stopped and turned to him as we all gathered around. He said that it is like dry wood, which can be ignited immediately. Similarly, if one is sincere, then he immediately becomes spiritually ignited. And if he is still moist from material contact, it may take hundreds of years or lifetimes. A pure devotee is like a match and the recipient the wood. If both are good, then there is fire. When you go to the fire, you become dry, but willfully we again put water. This nonsense business makes us wet. This process is already there, how to become dry. But instead of taking the process, we put water. Then how it will be ignited? The rules and regulations are the drying process. But without following the rules and regulations, if you again become victimized by Maya, then there is water and again dry it. So this is going on, watering and drying, watering and drying. Difficulty is that we dry and again water. So this is an amazing, really great analogy. Talking about bad analogies, this is such an excellent analogy. That devotional service, the association of pure devotees, is like a blazing fire of amazing heat and intensity. And if someone is ready, if they're dry, if they're like dry fuel, then yes, an 11th of a second can immediately ignite, just like a spark can start a huge blazing fire in a moment. But if the wood is moist, if the wood is still wet, then you apply a spark, and the spark may sit there and sizzle for a while. It may not take immediate effect. So because the association of devotee is like this blazing fire, then you seek the association of devotees. And if your fuel is still wet, then by that association, you'll become drier by the associating of devotees. Prabhupada mentions by following the rules and regulations of devotional service, you'll become dry. And then when you're sufficiently dry, then that immediate ignition can happen and you're enlightened. You're on fire. You're burning and blazing with devotional service. But Prabhupada says, but if you're again putting water, meaning, I'm following rules and regulations, I'm associating with devotees, but I'm also cultivating desires, I'm also cultivating sense gratification, I'm also doing some other nonsense thing here and there, then while you're drying, you're also splashing water. So Prabhupada says this drying and watering are going on, and therefore it could take days, weeks, years, or even lifetimes of that kind of process. But that's not a lack of the potency of devotees. The potency, the availability is there in an 11th of a second, but it also takes some endeavor, some qualification on our part. Also in connection with that, in the Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada also explains this point, how in a moment, in a second, who is that? Katvanga Maharaj, who became a devotee in just a second. He got a benediction from the demigods when he was going to die, and they say, you're going to die in one moment. So in that one moment, he took up devotional service and became perfect. And Prabhupada, speaking about that in other examples, he mentioned the Kumaras, who simply by smelling the lotus feet of Krishna, or Bilva Mangal Thakur by hearing about Krishna. So he says this, the Kumaras immediately became devotees simply by smelling the incense in the temple. Bilva Mangala Thakur simply heard about Krishna and then immediately gave up his beautiful girlfriend and started out for Mathura and Vrindavan, where he became a perfect Vaishnava. So these statements are not overestimations, nor are they stories. They are actual facts, but are true for certain devotees and do not necessarily apply to all. And for a person who is already in contact with Krishna consciousness, the described results are not unusual. So he says these are actually genuine potentials and genuine events that have happened, but it may not be applicable to every single person in every single instance, especially if we're still cultivating or allowing some material contamination in our life. But then he finishes by saying, but for someone already in contact with Krishna consciousness, the described results are not unusual. So this is the point, that this devotional service, amazing potency and associating with devotees, so important, so vital, that just a moment's association, just a little bit of it, can take one to very elevated stages of devotion very quickly, surpassing all the benefits of karma and jnana. But we also have to make sure that we're the dry fuel and that we're not the wet fuel and throwing water on the fire. Okay. Hare Krishna, thank you very much, everybody, for your kind attention. If there's any questions, comments, or discussion, now we can have that.
Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
That we are, I think, so lucky to have this devotee association and every day listening to this Bhagavatam.
Yes.
Little bit, we have
Yes.
lucky association.
Prabhupada also said small drops of water wear away the stone. So maybe we're not only wet fuel, maybe we're stone-hearted. What's that verse that about the stone-hearted? Anyway, there's that verse in the Bible that if one's not moved by hearing the holy name of the Lord, then their heart is certainly steel-framed. Hridayam Batedam. I can only remember a couple of words from it. I can't remember the verse. So drops of water where maybe we're not even fuel yet, maybe we're just stone, but
Yes.
whatever it takes, it takes a little while, it takes a long while. The goal is so worthwhile that we continue plugging away, wearing away the stone, or drying away. Now I'm mixing my analogies, mixing my metaphors, and maybe becoming confusing. But whatever it is, we continue determinedly pursuing this process because we're convinced that it'll give us the greatest goal. My wife has a comment or question. Yes. No. Oh yeah. Yes. Make it quick because no one can hear you. Okay. So my wife mentioned Bhagavad Gita Swalpam Apyasya Dharmasya Trayate Mahatovaya, that even a little advancement in devotional service gives such great freedom from fear and freedom from illusion. And she also mentioned the coming appearance day of Jayananda Prabhu as a time to meditate on this. And
We are so lucky to have all these devotee association. And thank you very much, Prabhu, for a nice
Hare
class.
Krishna. Next question.
Hare Krishna,
Mataji, go ahead.
Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, today's class was really like wonderful, and like whole universe should be here. Today's class. But
There are so many classes going on all over ISKCON. There's so many classes.
yeah, we are only 8 joined today, and actually, Prabhu, I wanted to ask you, like, what is the difference between the moksha and being a servant of the Lord?
Moksha or mukti, the way it's usually understood, simply comprises freedom from material contamination. That you're no longer taking birth in the material world, you're no longer entangled in the material world, therefore you're free, you're liberated. And generally, amongst most people, this is considered in a kind of impersonal way. Devotional service surpasses that, and actually devotional service is the real mukti. Just like in the Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam has 10 topics that it discusses. And one of those topics is mukti. And the way the Bhagavatam describes mukti or moksha is muktir hitwan yata rupam swarupena vyavastati. That real mukti means to give up your false form within this material world, and swarupena, to reinstate yourself in your actual form as a servant of Krishna. So the general understanding of mukti is only the first part of that you give up your material existence, but there's no positive replacement for it. But real mukti means you give up the material existence and you take up your constitutional existence as an eternal servant of Krishna. So that's one way of comparing mukti and devotional service. Or you could say the limited impersonal idea of mukti, which you must fall down from, and the eternal liberation of devotional service, which never ends. Is that explanation helpful?
Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So whoever getting the mukti, they're going to be returned back, or they're going to be just, I don't know, what are they going to do?
Yes, if you attain some kind of mukti without devotional service, then that is not an eternal position. How long it lasts or what its nature is, I cannot say for sure.
Okay.
But Prabhupada explains that if you're, and like that Bhagavatam verse describes from Lord Brahma also, that if you're neglecting Krishna, then your so-called mukti, you must fall down from it.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much.
Yes, I saw in the, let me just call up that verse in the, let me see if I can quickly find, I saw someone posted the verse.
I can do that, Prabhu. Kalpesh
Yes,
Prabhu has a question. Yes.
Could you either present it or read that verse?
Sure. Kalpesh Prabhu has a question in the meantime.
Okay, go ahead, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances.
Hare Krishna.
As usual, you put together such a wonderful points for discussion and explanation. So thank you for your association. So I have a question is like first question is it's kind of connected with this. So association, what is the behavior of the association when we are associating with any devotee outside our family members? And also sometime if we all are practicing in a family life, like a husband, wife, children, in that case also, what will be the behavior we need to have between the family members also? So
Okay.
there are two ends to it. Yeah.
Yes.
For us.
So all our different relationships are different. We behave in a certain way with friends. We behave in a certain way with wife or husband. We behave in a certain way with children, and we behave in a certain way with superiors and strangers and inferiors. If they're all devotees or all aspiring devotees, then within those differences, there are certain things that are the same. And those things are hearing and chanting about Krishna together, serving Krishna together, hearing and chanting, serving, preaching about Krishna together, learning about Krishna together. Prabhupada specifically mentioned for Grihastas in particular, he said, I'm trying to see if I can remember the whole list, worshiping the deities in the home, chanting together in the home, reading Srimad Bhagavatam together in the home, serving and offering prasad in the home. So what is that? 4 things as essential within family life. So husband and wife have their own particular duties and relationship, but these things are common to all of our devotee relationships. And if it's someone who's junior to us, then we take the responsibility of guiding and preaching to them in these different things. And if it's someone who's superior to us or above us, then we take the humble position and we hear about it from them. But in all of those cases, in the family or out of the family, the simple idea is that we make sure that Krishna is at the center of whatever we're doing and whatever our relationship is. Husband and wife, they have work, they have children and raise children, and all of that is done in a Krishna conscious way, hopefully. Is that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, you explained very well what we like, how to engage into devotional service, what should we do it, and how can we at the same time fulfill our duties, and I think so. Okay, I think so. You also explained the position where one would be, somebody would be the superior or somebody will be like below.
Yes.
That. So
Yeah, and for further explanation of that point, that's also described in Upadeshamrita, how you behave with junior devotees, how you behave with equal devotees, how you behave with superior devotees. That's also elucidated there.
Mhm. Yeah, in this only one experience which is sometime for myself I'm talking, is sometime that humility is not staying, to able to understand other um, and think that okay, I need to also learn from somebody else.
Yes.
That consciousness goes away very quickly when meaning that I think I know better than anybody else, and as a result of that, because other is trying to probably say something, but it ends up into argument or conflict, or we think that we
Yeah.
are superior. I mean, this is my personal experience. Even though practicing with both, like families members, when we are doing it, so we think that we know more than anybody else, And same
Yes.
thing, the person who is listening, they also think that they know more. And then that is where the big thing is. And in that situation, one or other person has to understand and see that humility part of it. And that's where I struggle in my life, either in outside association or within our family members, like telling to my sisters or anything, and all those things,
Yes, nicely put. That's an issue. We all have to develop the humility to be able to do this properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Anything else? Oh, there's that awesome Bhagavatam verse. Thank you. Tadasmasaram hridayam vedam yadgriyamanar harinama dhyayai navikriye tata yada vikaro netrajalam gatruheshu harsha. Certainly that heart is steel framed, which in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord with concentration, does not change when ecstasy takes place, tears fill the eyes and the hairs stand on end. So one moment's association of devotee can give that, but if we don't experience that, then we can understand that our heart is steel framed. And the heart is steel framed means we're still covered by anartas, we're still engaged in sense gratification, we're still committing offenses, which allow our heart to not react in the proper way. Yes, that's also excellent verse, beautiful verse. Thank you. Anything else? Question or it's 9 o'clock. Last question or comment? Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, everybody, for your very kind attention. I genuinely appreciate it. I hope everyone has an excellent day. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhuveva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.